They, at the time, counseled against it. But again, it's part of this ongoing pattern. Here's another development. Here's another drip. What do you think?
I don't think the market cares at all, Neil, and I question what's the uncertainty here. I mean, well, what's the uncertainty? If the Democrats take the House, the president is more likely than not going to be impeached. We know that he's not going to be in the Senate. So we have the Bill Clinton example, as Charles Payne mentioned, as a very good example of what we can expect. So is he impeached by the House? Probably, because it's politically motivated, right? But in the Senate, he's not. You got to get 2/3. So that's not going to happen. So
and by the way,
what
like you said, it did not happen with Bill Clinton. Started in the House, they couldn't finish it in the Senate. End of story. But it was a poll for a brief time there. Do you expect that it could be here?
Neil, I hope we get a market downside, because I would love it. I would be recommending to all of my investors, institutional or retail, to go long the market, because we know what the end game scenario is here. I doubt the market even negatively corrects, but if it does, I would say go long the market, because as one of your other guests mentioned, fundamentals are extremely strong. The tax reform is now law. They're not going to undo that. And I believe that tax reform is going to produce sustained growth, and earnings, let's not forget, have risen year over year in this whole entire year about 25%.
No, you're right
so
about
I think
that.
the outlook is very good.
Exactly. A lot stronger than expected. Scott Martin, though, you're looking at this, stepping way back from this. The president was saying, look, be aware of what could happen. Be aware of what's at risk. And that was a signal as well, wasn't it, to voters? Hey, you want to keep me in here? You want to keep this party going? What do you think?
Yeah, be careful what you wish for, because I promise you, whatever you get is not going to be as good as me. And I think he's right. Now, everybody's made some really good points, Neil. The irony at work here is pretty thick, isn't it? The economy is so strong. The market is so solid, and that's because of Trump policies and maybe some stuff leading out of Obama, maybe, that it almost works against him, doesn't it? Because if he gets knocked out of there, it probably won't matter as much as it would, say, at the beginning of his presidency, when this market and economy needed him so badly. So, to me, it is a great opportunity, like Catherine said, where you better collect your nickels, dimes, quarters, and dollars if this market pulls back even 5 or 10% if the House flips over, because we would be all in.
You know, Sam, a longer term, whatever you make of the prospects of impeachment, which is getting way, way ahead of ourselves, I think, as you all agree, the president was throwing it out there like, this is what you have to risk. And a number of Democratic leaders have been reminding their more rabid troops, be careful on this impeachment thing, because we're going to lose votes at the polls pushing this. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that's certainly a possibility. When you look back to the early 1900s, what you find is that, as your other guests had alluded to, whenever the ruling party is in power, they end up losing an average of 22 seats in the House. Yes, that would probably push it over to the Democratic side. And
not
even if we did
22 seats in the House would just barely keep it Republican, and maybe that's all the president wants, just keep it Republican, and this is all a moot point.
Exactly. But also the thought is, let's say the unthinkable occurs and we do end up getting conviction along with impeachment. Well, what we would end up is with the vice president, who is essentially Trump without the tweets. So we have the same policies being put forward.
Trump without the tweets is pretty good. All right, John,
sounds so boring.
Do you invest on any of this craziness? I mean, you're looking at hypotheticals, and I agree with Catherine. We're a long way from that, but there's no way to play something like that.
No, there's not. The market can't figure it out either, so I think the market is just pretty much ignoring it. Look, the market was flat pretty much from November 2014 to November 2016. The one thing that changed was President Trump was elected, and the perception, at least, of a business-friendly administration. So the trade for Trump was a positive one, but as far as trading on the certain moves and the capriciousness of Mr. Trump's Twitter line, I think is almost impossible. Now, trading on something like Amazon, where he went after Amazon, I did buy some Amazon when the stock went down because I thought this would blow over. Sure enough, it did. I think there's a little bit of a trade in that, but I would not recommend trading on the unpredictability of President Trump's Twitter timeline.
All right, Catherine, would you be trading on just the trade fears? In other words, the trade war fears, more than this?
In fact, I have.
Okay.
Neil, when I was last on your program, I said I don't believe the trade war. You know, it's a big brouhaha and really all for nothing. I think it's a negotiating tactic, and I actively and recommended my clients to invest. And that's proved to be a very lucrative trade. So I do think you can trade on political sensation.
We won't get into any nastiness.
Well, we have gotten into nastiness, but I think trade war, and this is semantics, of course, but a trade war is catastrophic. Right now, we're talking about negotiations, improving and getting fair trade. But I think you can trade on some of this headline news.
So, Scott, you've always been focused on laser beam on those earnings and the economy and the performance and those fundamentals, despite all this rumor mongering and the back and forth on trade. It's just noise to you, right?
Yeah, the market, Neil, remains a forward-looking indicator. But I'm going to tell you one thing. I don't want to spike the good party punch here, but you guys got to wonder, though, with all these shots that Trump is taking, I mean, what if one of them hits after all? I mean, that was a worry that we had a couple months ago. It didn't happen with some of the trade stuff, especially with Putin. But gosh, guys, they're throwing more and more at him every day.
That's a good point.
All right, guys, thank you all very, very much. And speaking of which, of the drama around news developments and drip, 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 we told about this Washington Post story that the president was considering a pardon and bounced it off his lawyers for Paul Manafort. Now the president is saying, we're hearing this from John Roberts and his team is saying that they did not consult Rudy Giuliani or Sekulow about any of this, Jay Sekulow, about pardoning Manafort. Much ado, pretty much.
Did they come out of the campaign? Because that could be a little dicey. And they didn't come out of the campaign, and that's big. But they weren't. It's not even a campaign violation.
All right. If no campaign funds were involved, it was just the president paying his lawyer to pay these women off. And then the story is that the whole story. There's no legal quagmire there at all. Former Justice Department official Tom Dupree. Tom, is he right?
Well, he's part right, but I think it's maybe a little more complex. I mean, look, Neil, the fact is that campaign finance law is one of the most complicated and Byzantine areas of federal law there is. I mean, I love complexity as much as anyone, but oh my goodness, it can be very difficult to decide in the context of a particular case what is a campaign finance violation and what isn't. Often the question turns on intent. In other words, we know from his plea that Michael Cohen effected these payments in order to circumvent campaign finance law, but it does not automatically follow that someone who was involved in that, such as the president, also had the intent to violate campaign finance law.
But what does campaign finance law say with regard to something like this? Even if you're not paying with campaign funds, you could be culpable?
Well, you could be. In other words, there are disclosure requirements, and if you have a situation where a third party reaches into his wallet and makes a contribution or a payment that's intended to affect the outcome of an election, just because that money didn't come from the campaign doesn't make everything okay. I mean, that's still something that would need to be disclosed. There would be issues about whether you're exceeding the authorized limits on campaign contributions and things along those lines.
All right. So the difference here is the candidate himself writing a check, or would it matter if it stopped at Michael Cohen writing the check with no involvement on the part of the candidate?
Well, the best way to answer that question, Neil, is it would be a different analysis. In other words, there would be one set of rules that could be applicable if it's a situation where either the campaign is writing the check or the candidate is writing the check out of his own pocket. Different rules come into play if you're in a situation where a third party, such as Michael Cohen, makes the payment. I would say that the fact that the candidate or the campaign reimburses a third party doesn't somehow insulate that. That would still be a situation where the third party, even if he is being reimbursed, would still need to comply with the disclosure and the contribution rules.
All right. Now, I know this gets a little afield from just legal matters here, but if the idea was to do this to affect the election outcome, in other words, if this had been revealed right before the election, it would have hurt the president, you could have effectively made that argument when the Access Hollywood tape got out, and it didn't, and everything was kind of downhill from there by comparison. So was that an issue? Is that an issue?
Yeah, and Neil, this is why it's so darn complicated, is because there can be a lot of expenditures that might serve dual purposes. In other words, you could argue that these types of expenditures are personal expenses, that these are the sorts of deals that, you know, Donald Trump would have made regardless of whether he was running for office or not, and they should be put in the personal expenditures category. But then again, you have the other side of school of thought, which would say, well, my goodness, the guy's running for president, and obviously the reason he did it was to increase his odds in the election, and so therefore it should be counted as campaign expenditures. You may recall we saw a somewhat similar situation back when John Edwards was a candidate, and he was making these payoffs or third people, and ultimately he was acquitted of these charges. But again, I think it just underscores that when you're talking campaign finance law, there's a lot of gray area, and in the end of the day, it often will turn on what the intent of these payments was.
All right, well, good luck on that. Then let me ask you real quickly about this story the Washington Post has put out, that the president was talking to his lawyers about pardoning Paul Manafort. Now, our John Roberts was able to contact Rudy Giuliani in Scotland and get his take on that. Giuliani said it wasn't so. The president was never considering this. So I don't know what's what there, but what do you make of that? And what would happen if the president were to do that?
Yeah, it is tough to know what to make of it. And look, the fact is the president has been signaling very publicly that he thinks what happened to Paul Manafort was fundamentally unfair. This is a president who has not hesitated to exercise his pardon power. So I think the possibility of a pardon at some point is certainly on the table. It also might explain why Paul Manafort, of all the people who have been caught up in this investigation, was willing to go to trial, to roll the dice. It's possible he thought there might be a pardon at the end of the road waiting for him. I think that the president was getting good legal advice to the extent his advisors were saying, look, if you're even considering the possibility of a pardon, let the investigation run its course and then decide who you want to pardon, as opposed to doing it right now or doing so preemptively.
Amazing stuff, as are you. Tom, thank you very, very much.
Thank you,
Tom
Neil.
Dupree,
I appreciate it.
Making sense of this craziness. All right, have you seen this monster of a storm? All right, Adam Housley is in Maui, Hawaii right now with a hurricane that won't quit and is just knocking on that beautiful state's door. What's the latest from there, buddy?
Well, Neil, we hadn't had rain in a few hours, and now you're starting to see the seas pick up a little bit. The rain's starting to come in some big drops. Not a lot of rain yet. We're expecting potentially as much as 12 inches, depending on where you are in the islands. It's been kind of a really calm morning, calm before the storm. Truly has been the situation here on Maui and for much of the islands here in Hawaii. Same can't be said for over on the Big Island. We have some video for you. It's only about 25 miles or so to my right, to our east from where I'm standing, the Big Island of Hawaii. On the east side of that island is where Hilo is located, which generally gets a lot of rain anyway. But the moisture has come from the hurricane really is drenched in some places. Up to 16 inches of water has come down. Conversely, on the other side of the island, on the other side of the volcanoes, it's pretty dry over there. They've only had about a quarter inch. So the rest of the islands are expecting to get a lot of rain here at some point. The preparations have been ongoing here for a couple of days. People have not taken this lightly. That's important. We were here yesterday morning and saw people preparing then, and they continue to prepare as they wait for the rain to come. And when you talk to officials here, whether the mayors or whether the governor, they all tell you, don't take this storm lightly.
We haven't really faced hurricane of this magnitude in as far as history as I can remember. It's going to be a new experience for everybody if it maintains its current strength. I'm hoping and praying that it'll diminish in strength.
What is for sure, though, is that Hawaii is going to be impacted by Hurricane Lane. The question is how bad.
And the president trying to get on the front end of this as well. He put out a tweet today saying, quote, I have authorized an emergency disaster declaration to provide Hawaii with necessary support ahead of Hurricane Lane. Our teams are closely coordinating with the state and local authorities. You are in our thoughts. We know of at least 12 people from FEMA that have come in here so far to help coordinate if necessary, Neil. The good news is we're getting little bits and pieces of it from the local forecasters here, of course, every 5 minutes or so updating us, is that the storm, while still big, is breaking down. The wind shear is helping. They don't believe the wind is going to be a big issue here now. At least that's the hope. The probability of high winds are getting lower and lower. But that rain total still is a worry for every single island along this chain. Again, the Big Island in one place has gotten 16 inches of rain. We're not sure if we're going to get that here in Maui or on Oahu or Kauai or Lanai or Molokai, but there is the potential for that, Neil, and we're all prepared for it here and just waiting to see what Lane brings. Back to you.
Thank you, Adam. Be safe. Adam Housley in Hawaii. And is there a storm of another sort